What would you do if the moment you had dreamed of for decades, your only son's wedding, turned into your greatest humiliation? When every flower you ever arranged, every ounce of devotion you poured into raising him, was dismissed with one sentence: stay in your lane. This is the story of how I stepped aside just as they wished. But in doing so, I set in motion an ending they never saw coming. I remember that Sunday afternoon so clearly, like it happened yesterday. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet you only notice after years of living alone. The spring sun came through the kitchen window, soft and golden, landing right on the counter where I had just placed a fresh vase of tulips. I had bought them that morning at the market, more out of habit than anything. Flowers have always been my comfort. Even now, years after closing my little florist shop, I can't help myself. I need them around me, the way some people need family photos on the wall. I had just poured myself a cup of Earl Grey. The smell always calms me. My husband used to drink it too, back when he was still here. I was stirring in a spoon of honey when I heard Daniel's footsteps. My son, my only child. He's 30 now, but every time he walks into this kitchen, I still see the boy who used to climb up on a stool to reach the cookie jar. He sat at the table, restless, tapping his foot against the floor, fiddling with his phone. I thought maybe something was wrong at work. He gets that look when he has news. And then he said it. "Mom." I proposed. Madison said yes. For a moment, the whole world seemed to pause. My spoon clinked against the mug in my heart. Well, it nearly burst out of my chest. I looked at him, and in that second, I swear I saw every version of him at once. The little boy in overalls, the teenager with messy hair, the young man learning to stand on his own. And now, a fiancé. My Daniel. "Oh, sweetheart," I said, and my voice shook. "I'm so happy for you both." And I was, truly. Tears filled my eyes before I could stop them. I smiled so hard my cheeks ached, but I didn't care. I could already picture it. The aisle, the flowers, the music, the laughter. For years, I had waited for this. I spent decades arranging weddings for other families, other brides, other mothers. I stood in the back of churches and gardens, watching strangers cry happy tears, imagining someday it would be me, watching my own son take those steps. And now, finally, it was our turn. A memory came back to me, soft but sharp, like it had been waiting in the wings. My own wedding day. Nothing fancy. We had daisies in jars, folding chairs borrowed from the church basement. My dress was secondhand, the veil slightly yellowed at the edges, but I didn't care. I had him, my husband, and that was enough. I remember the way he held my hand so tightly I could feel his pulse. Later that night, when it was just the two of us, he whispered, "Someday, we'll give Daniel the wedding we never had, one that shows him just how loved he is." He's been gone a long time now, but I never forgot those words. I held on to them through every holiday without him, through every lonely night, and through every wedding I decorated for someone else's child. I told myself, one day it'll be Daniel's. And here it was, the day I had carried in my heart for so long. "I already have some floral ideas," I blurted out, almost laughing through my tears. "Not to take over, of course, just little touches. I still know a few vendors. I'd love to help." I thought he'd smile. I thought he'd say, "Of course, Mom, you'll be part of it." But instead, I saw hesitation. Daniel's smile faltered. He shifted in his chair, looking down at the phone in his hands. "Actually," he said slowly, "Madison already has a vision. She's into, more modern, minimalist stuff. She follows this designer online. She's already planning to reach out." I froze. My smile held, but it felt stiff. "Oh, I see," I whispered. The tulips on the counter seemed to blur. "I just thought," I tried again, softer now, "maybe I could be part of a few decisions. Not all of them. Just a bit." Daniel swallowed. His voice dropped low, careful, like he knew what he was about to say would hurt. She thinks it would be smoother if you just stayed in your lane." It took me 5 seconds to even process the words. Stay in your lane. I laughed, too loud, too forced. "Stay in my lane?" I repeated, waiting for him to grin, to tell me Madison was joking. But he didn't. He just nodded. "She just wants things simple," he added quickly. "You know how she is. She doesn't want confusion." Confusion. That's what she thought of me. I sat there, still smiling, though it felt more like a mask than a face. My chest felt tight, like someone had pulled the air out of the room. Right, I said, my voice thin. Of course. A few minutes later, I excused myself, pretending I had a phone call. In truth, I just needed to be alone. I went upstairs, sat on the edge of my bed, and stared out the window as the sky turned from gold to gray. I told myself it was just a misunderstanding, that maybe Madison didn't mean it the way it sounded, that Daniel was just trying to avoid conflict. But deep down, I knew something had changed in that kitchen, and I had no idea then that stay in your lane was only the beginning of how invisible I was about to become. I tried to hold on to the joy a little longer, to keep the smile on my face as if nothing had cracked, but Daniel's silence said more than his words ever could. He kept looking down, scrolling on his phone like maybe the right sentence would appear on the screen and save him from this moment. Finally, he cleared his throat. Madison's been following this designer online, he explained. She does, really modern stuff. Very sleek, very, minimalist. That's what Madison wants. She's already been talking about hiring her. I nodded too quickly. Oh, I see. The words tasted strange in my mouth. I thought of all the years I had worked with flowers, the weddings I had poured my heart into. I had seen styles come and go, lace and pearls one decade, neon and glass the next. I had adapted to all of them, always finding ways to make each bride's vision beautiful, and now my own son was telling me that my experience didn't fit. But I wasn't ready to let go, not yet. I could just help with flowers, I said gently, trying to sound light, casual. Nothing big, maybe just a few arrangements for the church, or the reception tables. It wouldn't be much. Just something for me, For a second, I thought he might say yes. He looked at me, his mouth opening like he was about to give me the reassurance I needed. But then he looked away. His voice dropped. She thinks it's best if you stay in your lane. There it was again, those words. This time, not from Madison's mouth, but from my son's. I forced a laugh, too sharp, too fake. Stay in my lane? I repeated. What lane is that, exactly? Daniel winced. Mom, please don't take it the wrong way. Madison she doesn't want things to get complicated. She wants everything to be simple. Simple, as if I were chaos, as if my very presence would ruin her perfect picture. I kept my smile in place, though it felt like my whole face was trembling under it. I didn't want him to see how deeply it cut. I didn't want him to know that hearing those words from his lips hurt more than if Madison herself had said them. Of course, I said softly. I understand. But the truth was, I didn't understand, not one bit. That evening, after Daniel left, I wandered upstairs to my bedroom. The house felt bigger than usual, the silence stretching down the hallway like a shadow. I sat on the edge of my bed, still in the same clothes I had worn all day. I didn't even bother to turn on the lamp. I stared at the window as the light faded, watching the sky shift from pale gold to deep blue, until finally the stars began to appear. My hands rested in my lap, motionless, as though, if I stayed still enough, the ache in my chest might quiet down. But it didn't. All I could hear, over and over again, was Daniel's voice. Stay in your lane. It was the first time in my life my son had put a wall between us. The first time he had chosen someone else's comfort over my place in his life. And in that darkness, sitting alone, I realized that for the first time, I was being pushed out of my own family story. I should have known it wasn't really an invitation. The message from Madison had popped up on my phone 2 days earlier. Lunch with me, Mom, and some friends to talk wedding vibes. Come if you'd like. The words looked polite enough, but there was no warmth in them. Still, I told myself it was an olive branch. Maybe this was her way of including me. Maybe she was trying. So I dressed carefully that morning. A soft peach blouse, pearl earrings I hadn't worn in years, a light scarf because spring air in Chicago still carried a chill. I carried a neat little folder with me, a collection of floral inspiration boards I'd put together. Nothing pushy, nothing overwhelming, just a few timeless ideas I thought might help. Inside that folder were photos of white roses, baby's breath tucked gently along pew ends, lilies floating in glass bowls, simple arrangements that had graced countless weddings I'd worked on, styles that never failed to bring out tears of joy. I told myself this was my chance to show Madison I wasn't trying to take over, just to be part of it. The cafe was on a rooftop downtown, all neon lights and metal chairs, the kind of place young people posted about online. When I arrived, Madison was already there with 3 of her friends and her mother, Victoria. They were clustered around a high table, laughing at something on one of the girls' phones. "Hi," I said brightly, stepping up. Madison glanced up, her smile quick and thin. "Oh, Evelyn, you made it." Her tone carried the surprise of someone who hadn't expected me to actually come. Her friends gave me polite nods, their eyes flicking up and down my outfit as though measuring me against some invisible standard. Victoria offered a tight smile, the kind that never reached her eyes. I took a seat, setting my folder on the table. The server came by, and I ordered a tea. Madison barely looked up from her phone. "So," one of her friends said, "we're thinking about themes. Colors, like really bold colors." "Disco balls," another chimed in, "and maybe neon palms. It's so chic." They all giggled, voices tumbling over one another, excitement buzzing like static in the air. I waited for the right moment, then slid my folder closer to the center of the table. "I actually brought a few ideas," I said gently. "Just some thoughts, if you'd like to see." Madison finally looked up, her expression flat. "That's classic," she said, flipping one of the pages with the tip of her manicured finger. On it was a soft arrangement of white roses and baby's breath. "But we're going for something viral, you know? More like neon florals, pampas grass walls, that kind of thing." Her friends leaned in, nodding. One giggled, "Yeah, Pinterest aesthetics are the vibe now." The way she said it stung. Like the years I had spent building a career in flowers, the hundreds of brides who had called me the Queen of Vows, weddings, the ones who hugged me through their tears because my work made their day unforgettable, all of that meant nothing. In that moment, sitting at that table surrounded by bright lights and hollow laughter, I didn't feel like a florist with decades of experience. I felt like a relic, an old, outdated trinket someone had dragged out for show and quickly decided didn't match the new decor. My hands trembled against the folder. I pressed them flat, trying to keep steady, trying to keep my voice calm. "I just thought," I began. But Madison was already turning to her mother. "Mom, remember that LA designer I told you about? She did that wedding with the mirrored aisle. It went viral. That's the vibe I want." Victoria smiled indulgently. "Yes, darling. That sounds perfect." The girls all nodded in unison as if they'd rehearsed. I sat there, silent, my folder still open in front of me. The photos blurred as my eyes stung. I remembered the first time a bride called me Queen of Weddings. It was after a ceremony in a little stone church outside the city. She had stood at the altar, hands trembling, eyes full of tears, and whispered to me after, "You made it feel like a fairy tale." I carried those words for years. They had been my crown. And here, at this rooftop table, they might as well have been dust. Madison's laughter rang out again, high and sharp, as she described some viral TikTok trend involving floating lanterns and LED vines. Her friends leaned in wide-eyed as if she were a visionary. And me? I was invisible. I closed the folder quietly, pressing the papers together until the edges crinkled. I slid it back into my bag with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. When the server returned with my tea, I forced a smile, though my lips felt stiff. The steam curled up between us, carrying the faint scent of chamomile. I wrapped my fingers around the cup, holding on as though the warmth could anchor me in place. No one noticed. The conversation carried on without me, buzzwords, influencers, viral posts. I sat there, nodding at the right moments, smiling when someone glanced my way, though no one ever really looked. It was a kind of humiliation I hadn't known before. Not loud, not public, just sharp, quiet, cutting straight through the heart. When the lunch ended, I stood, adjusting my scarf, my smile still frozen in place. The laughter of Madison and her friends trailed behind me like an echo. And in that echo, one thought pressed harder than all the rest. I was no longer the woman they once called Queen of Weddings. To them, I was just an old relic who didn't belong at the table. A few days after that lunch on the rooftop, I decided maybe I just needed to try a different way. If Madison didn't want my flowers, maybe she would at least appreciate something more personal, something from the heart. So I went down to the basement and pulled out an old cardboard box I hadn't touched in years. Inside were albums, school yearbooks, little keepsakes from Daniel's childhood, his first drawing from kindergarten, the baseball card collection he was so proud of, even a few crayon-colored Mother's Day cards that I could never bear to throw away. I sat on the floor with that box, flipping through the photos. There was Daniel at 3 years old in a pumpkin costume, grinning with 2 missing teeth. Daniel on his first bike, his father running behind him, hands stretched out just in case. Daniel with frosting on his nose at his 5th birthday party. My chest ached, but in a good way. These weren't just pictures. They were proof. Proof of love, proof of time, proof that I had given him everything I had. And I thought, what bride wouldn't want these? A wall of childhood photos at the wedding, showing everyone who the groom was before the suit and tie, before adulthood swept him away. It seemed perfect. So I packed the albums neatly into the box and carried it to Daniel and Madison's apartment. Madison opened the door. She was polite, of course. She always was. Her smile was practiced, her voice warm enough to pass for kindness, but her eyes never softened. "Oh, Evelyn," she said, tilting her head. "We weren't expecting you." "I just thought I'd stop by," I said, lifting the box slightly. "I brought a few things. Old photos, keepsakes, maybe for a photo wall at the wedding." Her expression didn't change. She stepped aside, letting me in, but she didn't touch the box. Daniel appeared from the living room a moment later. His face lit up when he saw me, but only for a second. Then it dimmed, replaced by that same tired, careful look he always wore around Madison. I placed the box on the coffee table and opened one of the albums. The page showed Daniel at age 6, front teeth missing, holding up a trophy from Little League. "Wouldn't this be sweet?" I asked, my voice hopeful. "You could set up a wall of photos, Daniel growing up, the journey to this day. Guests always love that sort of thing." I looked at Daniel, waiting for him to smile, to agree, to tell Madison this was a good idea. But before he could speak, Madison leaned over the album. She let out a light laugh, short and dismissive. "Oh, that's cute. But we're going digital, Evelyn. A curated slideshow, you know, on a big screen. These old photos don't really fit our vibe." The way she said old made it sound like worthless. I froze, my hand resting on the page. The smile on my face faltered, but I forced it back quickly. "Oh," I said softly. "I see. Of course." I looked at Daniel, again, silently pleading. All he had to do was say one word, one sentence. "They're important to me, Mom. We'll use them." But he didn't. He just glanced at me briefly, then looked away, as if staring at the floor would make the moment pass quicker. That glance hurt worse than Madison's words. I closed the album gently and slid it back into the box. The cardboard seemed heavier now, as though the rejection had seeped into its edges. Madison smiled again, that thin, polite smile. "But thank you, really. It's thoughtful." Thoughtful, as if I'd brought her a casserole, not the history of her future husband's life. I nodded, swallowing hard. "Of course, I'll just take these back with me." I lifted the box, pressing it tight against my chest, as though holding it close could shield it from their dismissal. Back in my car, I set the box on the passenger seat. I didn't start the engine right away, I just sat there, staring at the album stacked inside, pages filled with smiles, scraped knees, birthday candles, Christmas mornings, and for the first time it struck me, if Madison had her way, none of these moments would ever be seen again. They'd be filtered out, erased, replaced by sleek slideshows with perfect lighting and curated aesthetic. I reached out, brushed a hand across the lid of the box, and whispered to myself, these were his real life, his real memories, my memories. How can they not matter? But to Madison, they didn't. And Daniel? He hadn't defended them. He hadn't defended me. I drove home with the box beside me, heavier with every mile. Not because of the paper and photos it held, but because it carried a truth I couldn't ignore anymore. Even my son's memories, our memories, were no longer welcome. They, too, had been filtered out. I thought maybe food could fix it. Food had always been my way of bringing people together. When Daniel was a boy, the dinner table was where everything happened. Stories about school, laughter over silly jokes, even tears when life got hard. No matter what, we always came back to the table. So when I invited him and Madison over for dinner, I poured myself into it, the way I used to. I wanted it to feel like home. I wanted Madison to see a different side of me, to know I wasn't just some outdated florist with dusty ideas. I was a mother. I had warmth to give. I spent the whole afternoon cooking. Chicken pot pie, Daniel's favorite since he was little. He used to beg for it every birthday. And for dessert, apple crumble, the recipe passed down from my grandmother. The smell of cinnamon and butter filled the kitchen, and for a moment it felt like old times. I set the table with linen napkins, candles, and the good china I hadn't used in years. I even polished the silverware, just as I had when my husband was alive. I told myself this was the kind of night that could soften things, maybe mend the cracks that had been forming. They arrived half an hour late. Madison walked in first, her perfume strong, her heels clicking against the hardwood. She paused in the doorway, wrinkling her nose. "Oh, wow," she said, waving a hand in front of her face. "It's very heavy in here. We don't really eat like this." I froze with the pot pie still in my hands. Daniel gave me a sheepish shrug, the kind that was half apology, half excuse. I forced a smile. "Well, I just thought you'd like something warm." "Comfort food." Madison didn't answer. She just sat down, crossing her legs, scrolling through her phone as Daniel pulled out a chair beside her. We started dinner, the three of us. The clink of forks and knives filled the silence. Daniel tried to ask about work, about the weather, but his voice sounded strained, like he was patching holes in a sinking boat. Madison barely touched her food. She pushed peas around her plate, took a polite bite of the crumble, and set her fork down. "And me?" I smiled. I smiled because I didn't know what else to do, but inside, memories started rushing in. I saw Daniel at 8 years old sitting at this same table, sauce smeared on his cheeks, laughing so hard milk came out of his nose. I saw my husband across from him, shaking his head but laughing too, teasing Daniel about needing a pot pie bib. I saw myself younger and fuller, thinking life would always be like that. Messy, loud, but full of love. The laughter in my memory clashed against the silence of the present. It was unbearable. I blinked the pictures away and looked back at Madison, who sat there scrolling, her expression blank. Trying to bridge the gap, I reached for a safe topic. "You know," I began, "I still keep in touch with a few wonderful florists downtown. There's one in particular, Carla. She's done amazing weddings for years. If you'd like, I could connect you—" Madison set her cup down a little too hard, the sound sharp against the china. "Please, Evelyn," she said, her smile stretched thin. "Stay in your lane. We already have someone." Her words cut through the room, colder than the silence had been. Daniel shifted in his chair but didn't speak. He just gave me that same helpless shrug, as if that was all he could offer. I felt my heart drop. I kept my smile, but it felt glued to my face. "Of course," I said quietly. "Of course." After they left, I stood in the kitchen, staring at the table still set for three. The candles had burned low, wax dripping down their sides. The plates were smeared with food untouched. I picked up the napkins, folding them slowly, one by one. My hands shook as I placed them back in the drawer. When I lifted one to my face, pretending to check for stains, tears slipped down my cheeks and soaked into the fabric. I stayed like that for a long time, alone in the quiet house, the smell of cinnamon still in the air, clinging to a dinner that was supposed to bring us closer, but instead showed me just how far apart we had become. As I wiped the table clean, my tears mixed with the crumbs and candle wax, and for the first time I understood, no matter what I served, no matter what I gave, Madison would never taste it as love. To her, and maybe even to Daniel, I was just someone who needed to stay in her lane. The night of that dinner, I told myself to be strong, to smile, to blend in. It wasn't my house, not my rules, but maybe, just maybe, if I showed Madison's family who I was, they'd see I wasn't the problem she painted me to be. Their home was beautiful, I'll give them that. A sleek high-rise apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows that showed the city skyline glittering in the distance. The floors were polished marble, the furniture sharp-edged and modern. But as soon as I stepped inside, I felt it. Cold. There wasn't a single photo on the walls. No childhood pictures, no family portraits, not even a messy stack of magazines on the coffee table. Everything looked staged, like a showroom in a furniture catalog. Beautiful, yes. But not lived in. Not loved in. Victoria greeted me first, Madison's mother. She wore a fitted navy dress, a glass of red wine in her hand, her smile perfectly practiced. "Evelyn," she said, kissing the air beside my cheek. "So nice you could join us." Her tone had the syrupy quality, sweet on the surface but sharp underneath. As we sat down at the long dining table, conversation started easily enough. Madison and her friends talked about color palettes and trending wedding decor. Victoria chimed in with opinions about venues she'd seen online. I stayed quiet at first, letting them talk, sipping from my glass of water. Then Victoria turned to me. "So, Madison tells me you used to be a florist?" "Yes," I said with a small smile. "For over 30 years. Weddings mostly. It was wonderful work." "Interesting," she replied, tilting her head, her voice flat. "But, now everything's on Instagram. Trends change so quickly. It's easier to just scroll and copy, isn't it?" The table chuckled politely. I swallowed hard. "Yes," I said softly. "But some things never go out of style. Real flowers, for instance. The way they smell, the way they make a room feel alive. You can't always capture that on a screen." No one responded. Madison changed the subject, rattling on about a rooftop venue she'd toured. Halfway through dinner, I decided to try again. I had come prepared. I reached into my bag and pulled out a small envelope. "I thought you might like these," I said, handing it across the table. "Just a few photos of Daniel when he was little. I thought maybe they could be part of the wedding display." Madison took the envelope, opened it, and slid the photos out. The first was Daniel's first day of school, backpack too big for his little shoulders, his hair sticking up in every direction. The second was him in a pumpkin costume for Halloween, grinning wide with 2 missing teeth. For a second, Daniel's eyes softened as he looked at them. A faint smile flickered, like he wanted to remember, like he wanted to laugh. But Madison gave a little smirk and set the photos down on the table. "They're cute," she said slowly, "but not really aesthetic, We're going for a certain look. Clean, modern, curated. These just don't fit." Her friends giggled. Victoria sipped her wine, saying nothing. I felt my cheeks burn. I reached for the photos, sliding them back into the envelope before anyone could wrinkle them further. "Oh," I said quietly. "Of course, I understand." But I didn't understand. These weren't just pictures. They were my son's life, his childhood, his real, messy, beautiful story. And now they were being brushed aside, called not aesthetic, like they were outdated wallpaper. I glanced at Daniel, hoping, pleading for him to say something, to defend the photos, to defend me. He met my eyes for just a moment, guilt written across his face. His lips parted like he wanted to speak, but then he looked down at his plate and stayed silent. That silence was louder than Madison's dismissal, louder than the giggles, louder than Victoria's wine glass clinking against the table. I finished my meal without tasting a bite. When dessert came, I smiled politely and declined. My stomach was too tight, too full of hurt. As the evening wound down, Madison's friends gushed over the latest viral decor ideas. Victoria suggested contacting a planner she'd heard of from a client. Daniel sat quietly, his fork scraping at crumbs he wasn't really eating. And me? I sat there holding an envelope of memories, my hand resting protectively over them, as though I could shield Daniel's childhood from being erased. When it was finally time to leave, I slipped the photos back into my bag. The city outside sparkled through the glass windows, indifferent and bright. I hugged Daniel quickly, barely more than a brush of shoulders, and said goodnight. He whispered, "Thanks for coming, Mom." But the words felt hollow, empty. On the ride home, the envelope sat heavy in my lap. I stared at it, my eyes blurring. And that's when I realized the truth. It wasn't just the wedding I was being shut out of. It was my son's past, my son's memories, my son himself. I hadn't just been erased from the plans for his future. I was being erased from the story of his life. That night, after the dinner at Madison's family home, I came back to my house and didn't bother turning on the lights. The silence greeted me like an old companion, and for once I didn't fight it. I let it press against me, heavy and honest. I set my purse down on the chair and stood in the middle of the living room, staring into the dark. My eyes adjusted slowly, catching the faint outline of the wedding albums still stacked on the bookshelf, dust beginning to settle on their spines. I thought about how I had once imagined opening them again with Daniel, laughing as we remembered. Instead, tonight I had carried an envelope of memories that no one wanted to see. I walked into my bedroom, still without turning on a light, and sat on the edge of the bed. My hands twisted in my lap, my chest felt hollow, like something had been scooped out. Then, almost without thinking, I got up and opened the small safe tucked in the back of my closet. Inside, under a folded blanket and some old documents, was the savings account book. It had been there for years. Our secret promise, mine and my husband's. I sat cross-legged on the floor, the book heavy in my hands. I opened it and ran my fingers over the faded ink, the rows of deposits, the careful handwriting. Page after page, line after line, each number was a piece of our lives. The extra shifts I had taken at the shop, the nights he had driven delivery trucks after his regular job. Every dollar we tucked away was meant for one thing only: Daniel's wedding. At the very back of the book, on a scrap of paper tucked between the pages, was his handwriting. My husband's. For Daniel's wedding, make it count. I held that paper as though it were his hand. My vision blurred as tears fell onto the ink, smudging it slightly. I remembered nights when we counted tips at the kitchen table, sliding a few bills into an envelope marked wedding fund. I remembered him kissing my forehead and saying, "Someday, honey, he'll know how much we love him when we give him this." I remembered the Christmas we skipped gifts for each other so we could add a little more to the account. We had given up so much. And I had carried that promise through widowhood, through loneliness, through every holiday when I sat by myself. And now, my son's fiancée had looked me in the eye and told me to stay in my lane. My son had repeated it, sealing it. My hands trembled as I whispered into the empty room, "They told me to stay in my lane. Then I will." I opened the checkbook, the one my husband had given me years ago with my initials embossed in gold on the cover. I began writing, my pen scratching across the page, my tears dotting the ink. When it was done, I stared at the numbers. I was pulling almost everything. Nearly $50,000. All those years of sacrifice, all those quiet promises, gone from their reach. I left only a small amount in the account, just a few hundred, enough to look symbolic, enough that no one could accuse me of abandoning them completely. But I knew what it really meant. It wasn't money I was withdrawing. It was my love, my devotion, my place in their story. For too long, I had been told to smile, to wait, to swallow my hurt. And now I had been told to stay in my lane. So I would. But in my lane, I was no longer funding my own erasure. I closed the account book and slipped it back into the safe, though it felt lighter now. I wiped my eyes, pulled the blanket over it, and shut the door. When I finally lay down in bed, the tears wouldn't stop. But they were different this time. They weren't just sadness. They were release. They were the soundless cry of a woman drawing a boundary no one else thought she could. I stared at the ceiling, whispering to the darkness, "This is mine. This choice is mine." And for the first time in months, maybe years, I felt a flicker of power in my chest. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't spite. It was a quiet kind of rebellion. And though no one else knew it yet, that night, I had made a decision strong enough to change everything. A decision in silence, but louder than any words I could ever speak. The knock came just after dusk, 3 soft taps, uneven, almost reluctant. I knew that knock. It was the same rhythm Daniel used when he was little and had done something wrong, like the time he broke a lamp playing baseball in the living room, or when he'd come home with a poor grade he didn't want me to see. I opened the door to find him standing there, his shoulders slumped, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. His hair was messy, his shirt wrinkled. My son, who used to stride into a room with boyish confidence, now looked more like a man carrying invisible weights. "Hey, Mom," he said quietly. His voice had that strained tone, like he had practiced what to say but lost the words along the way. I stepped back and let him in. He walked into the kitchen, his eyes immediately catching on the envelope on the table, the one I had sealed the night before. Inside was the check, just a few $100s, a fraction of what he thought would be there. He picked it up, frowning as he turned it over in his hands. "What's this?" "My contribution," I said simply. He slid the paper out, scanned the number, and froze. His face shifted from confusion to disbelief. "Mom, why?" I pulled out a chair and sat down slowly, folding my hands in my lap. I gestured for him to sit across from me. He did, but not comfortably. He kept shifting, his leg bouncing under the table. "You didn't want me in the wedding," I said, keeping my voice steady. "So I respected that." His head snapped up. "That's not fair. It's not that we didn't want you." "Yes, Daniel," I interrupted gently. "It is. Maybe not in your words, but in hers. And in your silence." He winced. "Mom, you know how Madison is. She wants control. Planning stresses her out. She gets overwhelmed so easily, and when she does, He trailed off, shaking his head. "And you let her erase me." I finished for him. The kitchen went quiet. The refrigerator hummed softly in the corner, the clock ticked on the wall. Outside, a car drove past, headlights flashing briefly through the blinds. Daniel didn't answer right away. His lips parted as if he wanted to argue, but no words came. I leaned forward, my eyes never leaving his. I didn't ask to run your wedding, Daniel. I didn't ask to choose the dress, the music, the menu. All I wanted was to be included, to help a little, to feel like I mattered on the biggest day of your life. And instead, every time I tried, she told me to step back, to stay in my lane, and you stood by. You let it happen. For a moment, I saw the little boy he used to be, the one who once stood in front of me, fists balled up, telling a neighbor kid, "Don't talk to my mom like that." The one who used to defend me against even the smallest slight. And now here he was, grown, engaged, staring at the floor because he couldn't find the courage to defend me against the woman he'd chosen. It broke something in me I hadn't realized was still intact. Daniel rubbed the back of his neck, still avoiding my gaze. "It's not like that," he muttered. "She doesn't mean to hurt you. She has a vision, Mom. And sometimes you have strong opinions." I let out a humorless laugh. "Strong opinions?" "Daniel, I suggested flowers. I offered photos of your childhood. Those were my crimes." He flinched. "You're twisting it." "No," I said softly. "I'm finally saying it straight." He leaned back in his chair, sighing heavily. "She just wants things to go smoothly. You know how stressful weddings can be. If I'd just what?" I asked, my voice sharper now. "Disappear? Pretend I don't exist until you're ready to send an invitation?" He fell silent again. His jaw worked, but no sound came out. I pressed on, my tone softer but firmer. "I've spent your whole life showing up for you, Daniel. Every birthday, every scraped knee, every heartbreak. And now, when I ask for just a sliver of space on your wedding day, I'm told to step aside. And worse, those words came from you." His eyes finally lifted to mine. They were wet, conflicted, full of guilt. "I didn't mean it that way," he whispered. "But you said it," I replied, "and you can't take it back." The room felt heavy. The air itself seemed thick, pressing down on us. He set the envelope back on the table with a soft thud, as if even holding it burned him. "She's going to lose it when she sees this," he murmured. I shrugged, keeping my voice calm. "That's between you and her. My part is done." For the first time in years, I felt steady. Not happy, not vindicated, but steady. Like a woman who had finally stopped waiting for someone else to give her permission to take up space. Daniel looked at me again, his lips trembling, but still he said nothing. His shoulders sagged, his gaze dropped once more to the floor, like a boy caught in a lie. I watched him in that silence, and it hurt more than any words could, because the boy who once defended me without hesitation was now a man who couldn't even lift his head. And in that moment, his silence said everything. It started with whispers. Little things Daniel let slip in our short, awkward phone calls. Madison had found someone, a game-changing event designer who was going to make their wedding go viral. "She's amazing, Mom," Daniel said one afternoon when he stopped by to return a casserole dish. "She has like 2 million followers on Instagram. Everyone's talking about her work. Madison says this will make the wedding unforgettable." I swallowed my doubts, but they rose anyway. "Does she have an office here in Chicago? A company? A license?" Daniel shifted uncomfortably. "She works mostly online. You know, digital age and all that. It's fine." I pressed. "Have you met her in person? Do you have a contract?" "Of course," he said too quickly. "Madison handled it. She already signed. It's locked in." Something in me went cold. "And how much?" Daniel hesitated, looking at the floor. 55. My breath caught. $55? I asked hopefully. He shook his head. 1,000. The room tilted for a second. I had to grip the edge of the counter. $55,000, given to a stranger from the internet. "Daniel," I whispered, my voice trembling, "did you even check references? Do they have a registered business address? A license? Anything?" He waved a hand, brushing me off. "It's fine, Mom. She's legit. Madison says she's the best." And that was that. He left soon after, refusing to hear more, and I was left staring at my quiet kitchen, wondering how quickly love could blind a person. Weeks passed. I tried to push it from my mind. I tended my garden, read my books, went for walks in the park. Still, unease clung to me like a shadow. I remembered too well the dangers of this industry. I remembered the year a photographer disappeared 2 days before a wedding, leaving a bride in tears. I had pulled strings, found a replacement in 24 hours, saved the day. That had been my world. Crisis, chaos, and the ability to fix it. But now, I wasn't even allowed a seat at the table. All I could do was wait. And the waiting ended with a phone call. It was just past midnight. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, dragging me out of half sleep. The screen lit up with Daniel's name. My heart sank before I even answered. "Hello?" I croaked, my voice thick with sleep. There was a pause, then his voice, shaky, broken. "Mom." I sat up in bed. "Daniel, what is it?" "She's gone," he whispered. My stomach dropped. "Who?" "Savannah, the planner. She took everything. The money's gone. Website deleted, phone disconnected, Instagram wiped. All of it. 55,000? Gone." His voice cracked on the last word. I could hear him trying to hold it together, but then a sob broke through. "Mom, what do we do?" I clutched the phone tighter, my knuckles white against the plastic. The sound of his crying clawed at my chest, tugging every instinct I had as a mother to rush in, fix it, make it better. But I stayed still, because I knew this wasn't my mess to fix. Not this time. I closed my eyes, letting his voice wash over me, and in that darkness another memory surfaced. Years ago, another bride, another disaster. The caterer had walked away the night before, leaving a family in panic. I had been the one to call every contact in my book, to haul crates of food into a church basement at dawn, to plate dishes until my fingers blistered. I had saved that wedding. I had been the hero. But here, now, I wasn't even invited. I had been told to stay in my lane. And I had. Daniel was still talking, still choking on his words. "Madison's blaming me. She says I should have convinced you to help. She says this wouldn't have happened if... He broke off, another sob cutting through the line. I listened, my lips pressed tightly together. For once, I didn't rush to soothe him. I didn't say, "It'll be okay." I didn't offer solutions. Instead, I sat there, silent, tears sliding down my cheeks into the darkness of my empty bedroom. In that silence, something inside me settled. This was the justice I hadn't needed to seek. The truth had revealed itself without me lifting a finger. They had cut me out, dismissed my wisdom, mocked my experience, and now, the very thing I could have protected them from had come to pass. I whispered into the dark so softly he couldn't hear. They told me to stay in my lane. And I did. Daniel sniffled on the other end, his breath ragged. "Mom, please, what do we do?" I closed my eyes, my hand tightening around the phone until it hurt. For a moment, I almost gave in. Almost told him I'd take care of it, like I always had. But then I saw Madison smirk at the cafe, Victoria's cold eyes at her dining table, Daniel's silence when I begged for just a little place in his story. And I knew. This wasn't mine to save. I let out a long, shaky breath and whispered only 3 words. "I don't know." Because I truly didn't. And because it was finally time for them to face the cost of erasing me. As I set the phone down on the nightstand, tears still wet on my face, I realized something sharp and clear. I didn't need revenge. Justice had already arrived, and it hadn't needed me at all. It started quietly. A new post on the neighborhood app. Lightly used sectional sofa, must pick up, urgent. I scrolled past it at first, not realizing what I was looking at, until my eyes caught the throw pillows in the photo. The same patterned pillows Melissa had bragged about last Christmas, imported from some boutique in Dallas. They were sitting now on a couch she was desperate to unload. The next week, I saw another listing, designer handbags. Photos carefully taken, descriptions precise, authentic, barely worn, DM for details. The initials stamped in gold were unmistakable. Melissa's prize collection, the same purses she had once paraded like trophies, now reduced to secondhand goods on a digital yard sale. Then came the SUV. I didn't see the moment itself, but Clara told me. She had been driving past their house one morning when a tow truck pulled into the driveway. She saw the driver attach chains, heard the groan of metal as the vehicle was hauled away. Melissa stood on the porch, arms crossed, face pale with fury. Daniel lingered behind her, his head bowed. The whispers followed soon after, neighbors murmuring at church, at the grocery store, outside the elementary school. What happened to them? They always looked so put together. I stayed silent. I knew exactly what had happened. The facade of their perfect little family had cracked wide open, exposing the rot beneath. The phone calls began not long after. At first, Daniel's voice was calm, almost casual. "Hey, Mom, just wanted to check in. How are you doing?" I let it ring, my heart pounding, but I didn't answer. The next day, another call. His voice this time carried a tremor. "Mom, I think the bank made a mistake. Something weird came up with the loan. Can we talk?" Again, I ignored it. By the third call, desperation had crept in. His messages piled up, each one more frantic than the last. "Mom, please just pick up. I know you're upset. I swear I'll fix this. Don't shut me out. You're all I've got." I sat at my kitchen table, the phone buzzing in my hand, and I did nothing. For years I had jumped at every plea, every sigh, every tilt of his head that said he needed me. Now, I let the silence answer for me. But while I withheld from him, I couldn't withhold from the children. One Saturday, I walked into a bookstore downtown. The shelves smelled of paper and dust, the kind of comfort that never asks anything of you. I wandered slowly, letting my fingers brush over the spines until I found 2 books, an illustrated atlas for Noah, who had once told me he wanted to see the whole world, and a storybook about brave princesses for Sophia, who loved dressing up in gowns made from old bed sheets. Next, I stopped at a clothing shop. I chose a navy blue sweater for Noah, soft and warm, and a pale pink coat for Sophia, with buttons shaped like little hearts. I ran my hands over the fabric again and again, imagining their smiles. At the counter, I added one final request. No return address? That night, I wrapped each gift carefully. Brown paper, neat folds, a ribbon tied just so. I slipped a small card inside each package. Not signed Grandma, not signed at all. Only simple words. With love, always. The next morning, I carried the parcels to the post office. My hands shook as I handed them over, not from fear, but from something heavier. Grief laced with love. I couldn't be their rescuer, not anymore. But I could still be their light in small ways, quiet ways. Days later, I saw a photo online. Not posted by Melissa, not meant for me, but shared through a mutual acquaintance. Noah wearing the sweater, grinning ear to ear. Sophia twirling in her pink coat, the hem flaring like a ballerina's skirt. I pressed the phone to my chest, tears burning my eyes. For the first time in a long while, I felt warmth. Not from their parents, but from the proof that love could still find its way through walls, through silence, through betrayal. Meanwhile, Daniel's calls didn't stop. If anything, they grew more desperate. His voice cracked in one voicemail. "Mom, I can't hold it together anymore. Melissa's furious. The bank's on us. The kids." His words broke off in a choked sob before the line went dead. I sat there in the stillness, listening. The Evelyn of months past would have leapt into her car, racing to save him from himself. But this Evelyn? She let the voicemail play, then deleted it. Because I knew now what I hadn't wanted to admit before. Saving him had cost me everything, and he had still betrayed me. Clara noticed the change in me. One evening, as we sat on her porch watching the sun bleed orange across the horizon, she said softly, "You're quieter lately. Stronger." I smiled faintly. "I've realized something. I can't save Daniel. Not from his choices, not from himself." She nodded knowingly. "But you can still love those children." "Yes," I whispered, "that I'll never stop doing." And so I found myself in a strange balance, cutting the rope that tethered me to my son's chaos while weaving a gentler thread toward the grandchildren he was failing. I could not mend the cracks in their household. I could not stop the sofa from being sold, the SUV from being dragged away, the whispers from spreading, but I could keep the warmth of my love alive in the smallest of ways, tucked inside pages of a storybook or stitched into the lining of a coat. I could not rescue their parents, but I could refuse to abandon the children. And in that decision, I discovered a new kind of strength. Because the truth was clear now, I could not save their mother and father, but I would not stop loving Noah and Sophia. The letter came on a gray Thursday morning, tucked between a grocery flyer and an electricity bill. I almost missed it, almost tossed it aside with the junk mail. But when I saw the return address, Lone Star Bank, legal department, my stomach clenched. I sat at the kitchen table, the paper trembling in my hands as I opened it. Notice of pending litigation, it read. My name appeared again, bold and sharp at the top. Evelyn Carter. Below it, in damning black ink, defendant, Daniel Carter. The words blurred as I read. Fraud, identity theft, unauthorized loan. The charges were no longer whispers on a page. They were shouts backed by law. I pressed the letter flat against the table, my hand shaking. For weeks I had carried the suspicion like a secret dagger in my chest. Now, the blade was real. My son was being sued for the loan he had forged in my name, and I was tethered to it all. That evening, the knock at my door came. It was not gentle, not hesitant, it was desperate. I opened it to find Daniel standing there, his frame thinner than I remembered, his cheeks hollow, his eyes bloodshot. His clothes hung on him like they belonged to another man. "Mom," he said, his voice breaking on the word. I didn't speak. I only stepped aside. He collapsed onto the couch as if his body had given up holding itself together. His hands shook as he buried his face in them. "I can't hide it anymore," he whispered. "I messed up. God, I messed up so badly." I stood across the room, arms folded, waiting. He lifted his head, tears streaking his face. The credit cards, I maxed them out. Then I thought I could fix it, so I invested in a friend's business. It was supposed to be safe, Mom, he promised. His voice cracked. It failed. Everything failed. I stared at him, stone still. His next words dropped like stones in water. "I forged your name. I took the loan in your name. I thought I could pay it off before you ever noticed. I just needed time." The silence between us was unbearable. His confession hung heavy, foul. When he was a boy, I remembered nights sitting beside his bed, his small body trembling with fever. He used to clutch my hand and whisper through chapped lips, "Mommy, don't leave me." I would hum softly, press a cool cloth to his forehead, and promise him I never would. That memory rose, unbidden, a cruel contrast to the man before me now, the man who had used my trust like currency, who had stolen not only money but my very name. He slid off the couch and onto his knees in front of me. His shoulders shook. "Please, Mom, I'm sorry. I'll make it right. Just don't hate me. Please. I can't lose you too." For a moment I wanted to reach out, to lift his chin, to remind him of the boy who once needed nothing more than my presence to feel safe. But the stack of papers on the coffee table stopped me cold. I reached for them, pulling out the copies of the bank documents, the ones with his forged signature scrawled in place of mine. I held them up between us. "Do you see this?" I asked, my voice steady but sharp. His eyes darted to the papers, then back to me, wide and wet. "This," I continued, "is not a mistake. This is a choice. You didn't just fail, Daniel. You betrayed me." He sobbed harder, his forehead pressing against my knees. I was desperate. I didn't know what else to do. I closed my eyes, fighting the sting of tears. My hands tightened around the papers until they crumpled. "You had a choice. You could have come to me. You could have told me the truth. Instead, you made me a criminal on paper." His breath hitched. "Please, please forgive me." I stepped back, away from his reach. In that moment, it was as though the boy I once cradled had vanished completely, replaced by a man I no longer recognized. My voice broke as I whispered the truth that shattered me, more than the loan, more than the fraud, more than the law itself. I lost my little boy a long time ago, and now standing here I see only a stranger. The next time Daniel came to my house, he didn't arrive with tears. He came with silence, carrying the weight of his mistakes in the slump of his shoulders. His eyes were hollow, his hands trembling, as though the bones inside them had turned brittle. On the table between us lay a folder, its contents neatly arranged. The loan documents, the bank notices, and one more thing, a formal agreement drafted by my lawyer. I tapped the folder with my finger. "Sit down, Daniel. If you want my help, these are the conditions." He lowered himself into the chair like a man bracing for execution. I opened the folder, sliding the first page toward him. "I will pay the minimum past due amount. Only enough to keep the bank from dragging my name into court. Not a cent more. That money will not save you. It will buy you time. Nothing else." He nodded quickly, as if afraid the words might be snatched back before they landed. I continued, my voice sharper now. "From this day forward, you will cut all financial ties with Melissa. No joint accounts, no shared credit cards. Her spending is her responsibility. Yours is yours. If you cannot separate, I cannot help." Daniel's lips parted, a protest caught on his tongue, but when he saw my eyes, steady, unyielding, he swallowed it back. His Adam's apple bobbed as he whispered, "Okay." I slid the second page across the table. "You will get a job. A real job. Not another dream investment, not another scheme. Steady work. You are done chasing fantasies. If I hear of one more dollar lost to opportunity, this agreement ends immediately." His face burned red, shame flooding his features. "I understand." "And finally," I said, pressing the last page flat, "you will repay me. Every cent. You have 5 years. No excuses, no delays. You will sign this and you will live by it. Otherwise, I will let the law take its course." Daniel's hands shook as he reached for the pen. For a moment he hesitated, staring at the lines of ink that would bind him tighter than any loan ever had. His voice cracked. "Mom, this feels like a contract, not family." I leaned forward, my words precise, each one heavy as stone. "Because family does not do what you did to me. A son does not forge his mother's name. A man does not gamble with his children's stability. You lost the right to call this family when you chose deceit. Now you will earn it back through accountability." Silence stretched between us, broken only by the scratch of the pen as he signed. The lawyer, seated in the corner, nodded once, then gathered the documents with quiet efficiency. Daniel set the pen down, his hand trembling. He couldn't meet my eyes. I reached for the folder, closed it with finality, and said the words I had rehearsed in my heart for weeks. "This is the last time. You will not lean on me again. From here on, you stand on your own. If you fall, it will be by your choices, not mine." Daniel's lips parted as if to speak, but nothing came. He simply lowered his head, shoulders shaking in a mix of shame and fragile relief. As he left the house, I felt a strange duality. Grief so sharp it hollowed me out, and pride so fierce it burned through the hollow spaces. Because I had finally done what I had never thought I could. I had set the terms. And in that moment I realized I was no longer the victim of his choices. I was the author of my own survival. It happened slowly, then all at once. Melissa had always carried herself like a queen in her castle, ruling the house with silent disapproval and loud sighs. But the day Daniel cut her off financially, the cracks spread fast. At first it was subtle. Cold shoulders. Late nights spent locked in the bedroom, her voice raised on phone calls with friends or her mother. Then came the arguments, their voices sharp enough to pierce the walls. I didn't need to hear the words to know what they were fighting about. Money, responsibility, control. And then, one morning, Clara stopped by with the news. "Melissa's gone," she said simply, standing on my porch with her hands folded tight. I blinked. Gone? Packed her bags, took her clothes, her jewelry, and nothing else. Daniel and the kids are still there, but she left. I sat down heavily, my heart pulling in 2 directions at once. Relief that her disdain was no longer poisoning the air, and sorrow for what it meant for Noah and Sophia, suddenly abandoned by the mother who should have loved them fiercest. A week later, I saw Daniel's car parked outside a crumbling brick apartment complex on the east side of town. The SUV was gone, replaced by a dented sedan he must have bought secondhand. Through a neighbor, I learned he had taken a night job delivering groceries and takeout orders. He rode the city streets in the dark, headlights his only companion, trading sleep for wages. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest. For the first time in years, Daniel was standing on his own 2 feet, even if they shook beneath him. He called once to tell me he had moved. His voice was tired but clear. "I'm trying, Mom. The kids and we'll figure it out." I didn't rush to visit. I didn't swoop in. Instead, I listened, murmured a quiet, "I know you will," and hung up. Because I had learned something vital. Distance was not cruelty. Distance was survival. Still, I couldn't let the children feel forgotten. Once a month, I packaged small parcels, storybook adventures for Noah, hair ribbons and coloring kits for Sophia, sometimes a soft sweater or a pair of warm socks. I never signed my name. The boxes arrived with no sender, but I knew, somehow, they would recognize the love folded inside. A friend from the post office once asked, "Don't you want them to know it's from you?" I shook my head. One day, maybe. But for now, it's enough that they feel cared for. In the meantime, my life found a rhythm I hadn't expected. Clara became more than a neighbor. She became a sister of sorts, a steady presence who never asked for more than I could give. The women's circle at church welcomed me fully, their chatter and laughter filling the hollow places Daniel and Melissa had left behind. I taught more sewing lessons, helped children stitch crooked lines into bright patches of fabric. The imperfections made them beautiful. We gathered often, around tables cluttered with spools of thread and steaming cups of coffee. They told stories of lost husbands, wayward children, broken homes. I told mine, and instead of judgment, I found nods, hands squeezing mine, voices saying, "Me too." In their company, I discovered a truth sharper than any betrayal. Family is not always the one you're born into. Sometimes it is the people who stand beside you when the ones who share your blood walk away. I thought of Robert often, what he might have said if he saw Daniel now, scraping by in a dim apartment with 2 children who deserved more. Would he have been angry or simply disappointed? Sometimes I still caught myself reaching for the phone, tempted to check in, to ask if Noah and Sophia were eating well, if Daniel was managing the bills. But I stopped myself. Not out of coldness, but out of resolve. I had drawn the line. I would not step back across it. And every time doubt crept in, I reminded myself, I had not abandoned them. I had chosen me. On a cool autumn evening, as I walked home from the church, leaves crunching beneath my shoes, Clara slipped her arm through mine. "You look lighter these days," she said warmly. I smiled, the truth surprising me even as I spoke it. I finally am. Because yes, I had lost a family of blood, broken by lies, betrayal, and silence. But in that loss, I had gained something else. Something quieter, steadier, more real. I had found myself again, and I had found a family of choice in friendship and community. It was late February when the knock came. The air outside was cool, almost kind, carrying the faint scent of rain-soaked earth. I had been sitting by the window with my sewing, the hum of the needle filling the silence. When the knock sounded, steady but hesitant, my heart skipped. For a moment I thought it might be Clara or one of the church women dropping off a pie. But when I opened the door, it was him, Daniel. He stood there thinner than I remembered, his jacket frayed at the cuffs, his hair longer and unkempt, but there was something in his eyes I hadn't seen in years. Clarity. Not desperation, not manipulation, not the frantic darting of a man cornered. Just honesty. "Mom," he said softly, his voice raw. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside without a word. He sat gingerly on the couch as though afraid it might reject him. His hands twisted together in his lap, but his shoulders didn't slump in defeat this time. They squared, shaky but determined. "I've been working," he began. "Nights, deliveries. It's not glamorous, but it's steady. I've managed to pay down some of the debt." He hesitated, then added, "The kids, they have food, clothes, school's covered. I'm not saying it's easy, it isn't, but it's ours. I'm doing it." I sat across from him, my chest tightening. "And Mom," he lifted his eyes to mine. They were wet, but the tears didn't fall. "I'm not here to ask you for money. I'm not here for a bailout. I just wanted you to know I'm learning how to be a father, how to be a man." For a long moment I couldn't speak. My throat burned with words I had carried for months, words of anger, of grief, of betrayal. But none of them seemed right now. Instead, the tears slipped quietly down my cheeks. I reached for a handkerchief, dabbing them away, not wanting him to mistake them for weakness. "I'm glad, Daniel," I whispered. "I truly am." He nodded, swallowing hard. There was no embrace, no dramatic reconciliation, just a fragile understanding hanging in the air, a thread stretched between us, frayed but still holding. When he stood to leave, I didn't stop him. I didn't ask when I would see him next. I only watched as he walked back down the path, his stride unsteady but forward. For the first time in years, I believed he might not fall. That night, as I closed the curtains and turned off the lights, I thought of Robert. I thought of his voice telling me once, "Evie, sometimes the hardest thing a parent can do is step back. Let them stumble, let them rise." I finally understood. I whispered a prayer, not for Daniel to be saved, but for him to stay strong in the struggle he had chosen to face. For Noah and Sophia, that they would remember not just the chaos, but the resilience that followed. And for myself, that I would never again mistake endless sacrifice for love. Motherhood is not endless sacrifice. Love is not, measured by how much of yourself you erase. Sometimes loving means letting go at the right moment, letting your child rise from the ruins of his own choices. I lost the family I thought I had, But in the ashes, I found myself again, and perhaps in time Daniel will find himself too. Until then, I will keep my distance, not out of cruelty, but out of love, the kind that sets both of us free.